Testing. Okay. Good morning. How's everybody doing? It's nice to meet every last one of you. My name is Ptah, as I was introduced. This piece is called Necessary Evil. And I want you to really listen to the words, and because we're going to have a conversation about this afterwards, and then I'm going to go and break down the content of the poem itself. So check it out. They call this the land of the free, home of the brave. All men were created equal, unless you're a slave. What paved the way to racial wealth gaps? Segregation between whites and blacks. One group prosper, the other collapse. One group were given handouts. The other was told to pull their bootstraps. Let's pull up some historical facts. Indian Removal Act, with 25 million acres of land was snatched from natives. In the Homestead Act, 270 million acres out west was converted to private property for white conquest. Aborigines inhabited the land naturally, but white colonies' greed constructed death and disease, no anomaly. Naturalization, which laid the foundation for USA citizenship for 10 million European immigrants, but not blacks born on plantations. Now let's look at modern segregation, white privileged nation. Social security, luxury, financial safety, nearly exclusively for whites because it excluded agriculture, and blacks were sharecroppers, making whites legal robbers because Jim Crow laws extorted black farmers. Speaking of Jim Crow, it stimulated white economic growth and left blacks chained to a slave boat with the worst schools, worst jobs, dilapidated ghettos, terrorized by white lynch mobs in white hoods and white robes. State-sanctioned violence. What you expect? Police the Ku Klux Klan. So while the crosses burned on black lawns, they watched in silence. Oh, it gets deeper. Historical amnesia makes me think of a type of political anesthesia. De facto sandcastles washed away by de jure tsunamis. Public policies explicitly dividing counties. Urban-suburban donuts, black sardined in the middle. Economically in limbo, redlined in ghettos. Deplorable and immoral, while a sweet fat ring of rich burbs filled with whites because of FHA oversight. G.I. Joe, the real American hero. For white vets only, the bill ignored the Negro. The New Deal was not only symbolic to white malignancy, it literally created complicit covenant clauses. The boogeyman came out the closet. When blacks moved in white neighborhoods, the KKK lost it. However, race baiting and scare tactics like blockbusting showed the pernicious way of hustling, real estate mugging. Too much to cover, so let's move forward. We was fed bull, so now it's time to Matador slay the tourists. The war on drugs, incarceration nation, prison plantation, booming human trafficking of black faces. Weed and crack, colored criminal black. While whites don't slide through the cracks, they glide through the gaps. Possessing drugs at higher rates, ignored by the jakes, crack addiction grew the prison population at a rapid pace. But today, it's a different chase. Now it's a public health issue. Opioids impacts the white race. Is there a good reason for necessary evil? Probably. Obama was an 8-year party. Rocked the masses to sleep. First time in history MCs was allowed in the White House, rapping the beats. Everyone thought it was sweet. Gay marriage was legalized. Because our first black president, the nation was post-racialized. Then Trump pops up bearing a 4 or 5, busting off race hate. The veil been lifted off your eyes in plain view. Because on the grand scheme of things, nothing really changed but the time. I've been seeing the signs and euphemisms, schemes like black identity extremism, the modern COINTELPRO. Jeff Sessions chasing ghosts while dismissing white domestic terrorism, the nation's #1 threat, killing innocent victims, for instance. Charlottesville riots and Dodge murderers. Tiki torches marches, no arrests, police observing them. Now look at Ferguson, tanks and rubber bullets. Even used it as a test for new military equipment. Not to mention subprime lending. And even though the housing bubble burst in '08, it still displayed racism. Predatory loans to mostly black victims. They were easy prey because of the environments they lived in. Reverse redlining, steep interest rates led to impossible mountain climbing. 2019, look how far we done came. White privilege lethal injection, blacks take it in vain. How can we remedy centuries of pain, disdain, biopsychosocial strain that even lives in people's last name? Trump proclaimed to make America great again by committing the America's most greatest sin. A man with sun-kissed complexion skin, squeezing the juice out the vast majority of our citizens. When will it end? If the government don't fix it, then who will? A diverse collective of women and men who recognize the powers in the people, who can see through the deceitful evils. And if we don't support the system, it becomes feeble. Because the responsibility to right the wrongs belongs to those that make laws legal. There's a part we must all play. Universal laws we all obey, despite our societal decay. Evil is necessary when the good outweighs the wicked. So let's uplift it. Mind, body, spirit. Thank you. I appreciate the love. There are some questions on the table that I would like you to discuss. And they're all related to the poem. So you can look at the question, have a conversation for like around 15 minutes. We're gonna reconvene and we're gonna discuss what you guys talked about.
Mr. Rocks. I do.
You know, like it's really a character. Like it's a Netflix. It's putting on a Netflix movie.
Yo.
Why are you like cool?
Somebody be like, yeah.
How about you put that down? It don't make sense to me.
What you get there.
See the video of Tyson? Yeah.
You have to be able to explain it though. So white people.
Yo, Mike. Be like, yeah.
That's so hard today in my life. I think that was your idea of like
Nice of you to join this group, but this is the group you're supposed to be sitting with.
No. Excuse me.
I look like Tupac.
Come on,
on, give me your opinion, Colin. Come on. You got started like, yeah. Nah, difference though. Back then, you couldn't even use the bathroom in certain places, you know what I'm saying? But right now, it's not as obvious, you know what I'm saying? Back then, it was, you know what I'm saying, public with it. Now, people just trying to hide it.
Stop doing stuff. Put it
Word.
down.
Making the spot hot, man.
Can't you turn it off?
Mike.
Yeah.
Yo, she looking at you too like, don't do it, bro.
Right, she looking right
looking
at
like,
you.
don't do it. You talking about some mic drop.
Say you wasn't going to just turn
Right.
it off.
Black people are always told to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. Well, you know, and white people are the ones that's saying that, but they were giving their bootstraps. See what I'm saying?
So they're saying like colored people work more harder than white people because they received it without any effort.
Right. So yeah,
It's
exactly.
handed out to white people, right? So, and it's kind of, so especially to hear a white person say, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Well, it's easy to say, right? Because the white person didn't have to do it. They were handed by the government. Someone has to be protecting everybody, all of these things. So what boots, so I guess that's the, when we get the mic, whoever wants to speak, name some of those bootstraps. So some of those issues that
I
were
thought black
handed.
people got bootstraps. Like food stamps and Section 8. Isn't that a bootstrap?
But look at the problem behind it. Why did they have to be given those? Because of, yeah. Think about the poverty, right? The divide. So that was, I don't want to say like induced by, but that is a created issue where then people did have to get food stamps and did have to go through all of that. So what would some of the issues be? What do you guys think? Stop getting us all.
No, I didn't.
So one of you guys are talking. I'm not talking.
You talking, you're
No.
the teacher.
All right,
I'm
wait.
not the participant in
All right,
this.
wait.
You are.
Yeah, you are.
If y'all get the answer, then I'll talk.
Okay. So what do you think? What should we tell Eddie to say?
We should tell them that the white people get their bootstrap from the government.
Okay, so the bootstrap is representing
Handouts from the government.
handouts from the government. You can say that though.
Ms. Collins, how you gonna take our paper and take our answers?
Wait, do I have to read the
No, you giving them to your other group like we not your second period.
So like with our don't give it up. We're given kind of like an easier way,
An easy way out. Like,
and then African Americans had to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. But given.
yeah, I think we gotta pass it off. I'm not sure. Are you confused on like
No, I just had like a
what
blank. I just had a blank.
Why don't you explain what?
Yeah.
you should be saying is where colored people get their bootstraps from is working hard on what they want to achieve and what they need.
Without any handout.
Yeah. And white people get is freely given it by the government. Like they get the easy way out while colored people are working hard. I will say that, but I don't like my voice on the microphone. I don't.
Alright, we're gonna put you on the mic. You're gonna answer.
No, I'm not getting it. Come on, answer it, bro. Answer what?
Eddie's gonna speak.
Oh.
We testing?
Go in. Yeah, I just came. See, I knew it. I knew I should have kept it right there.
Okay, let's bring it back. First and foremost, what did you think about the poem itself? Okay. What came to mind when you were listening to it? Like what you were thinking about when you heard it? Not everybody speak all at once, but so this is a rule I have called one mic, which means, one person speak at a time. So if there's any reflections of the poem itself, please feel free to raise your hand, and there's a microphone that Ms. Teague will give you.
I have the mic. I will bring it to you.
And please say your name and then, reflection.
My name is Aiden Delahanty, and one thing I noticed about the poem is that you flowed through the entire American history in the process.
Say that again?
You went through American history in the process of saying your poem.
Yes, definitely. Anybody else? All right, that's cool because the questions that I gave you is tied to the poem. So we got tables with, I can't call every table for the sake of time. So I'm gonna just get a few comments from a couple of tables, well, maybe 3 tables, okay? So who wanna go first? Again, please announce your name.
Hold on. My name is Asada. Hold on. Okay, so. Okay. So, you done? Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, so our question was, how does the structure of capitalism equate to the member object and I don't know that. But
axiology.
Basically value system. Shush. So basically we broke down the question, and since we had Mr. Berry as our teacher, it was pretty easy because that's our global teacher. But capitalism is the idea that people with more money are winning and people with less money are losing, and that's their fault. And that's not factual in most cases. So then we broke down what value system meant, and basically that's what is important to you, and we came up with important values are character, equality, and diversity. And just because you have money doesn't mean that you can't have these values, and doesn't mean that you do have these values. And yes, something like, so, wait, hold on. And money is also important and material, and yeah.
Okay. Yeah, give him a round of applause for that. That's a great response. You have any more responses? We have this table over here. Okay, please respect the person with the mic.
So I'm Maya. Our question was, what are your thoughts on Donald Trump as president? So most of our responses were bad job at managing priorities of nation, scary how much power he has, he's not properly trained to be president, he sounds very nasally, and he's a horrible public speaker. He shouldn't eliminate climate change protection, so a lot of his actions have not helped our country. However, he has continued Obama's economic increase, and he is an anti-socialist, which to some is a good thing. He has a horrible management of his cabinet, and a lot of the laws that he wants to implement continue structural racism. He focuses on immigrant terror, not white terror in our country. He has been successful in the Middle East. He can't negotiate, so he resorted to the government shutdown. Some people think he has an impressive enforcement of immigration, and other people think that his stubbornness over the border wall is not great, and that money could be spent on other reforms.
Thank you. And that was another thoughtful response, definitely. But I have one more response. We got this guy back here. I'm right there. Oh, right there? Okay. All right. Did he ask? Okay. Okay, so we're going to take two more then, for the sake. All right. Please stand up and state your name.
My name is Colin. And our question was, what was the difference between segregation in 1959 and 2019? And we said segregation back then was more public and open, and now it's all like they show it, but it's more low key and hidden.
You said it's more low key? That's what you said? Okay. Thank you for that. Okay, last but not least, one mic.
My name's John. The question is, what do you think?
It's okay, man. Go ahead.
My question is, what do you think are the origins of the conflict between police and communities of color? Well, this is because of racial tension, because for some reason, these people, they just somehow hate or love each other. But also, it's also the discriminating against people because of color through treatment or unfair response to people of color, or they selectively taking sides based on skin color. Take, for example, Eric Garner. Since Eric Garner, he was just standing there at the shop, and then there was like police coming at him. They choked him to death, and he constantly said, "I can't breathe." He's been saying that for the past few seconds before he's actually rushed, and he died. That is because he died from a chokehold. And those cops, they're being in denial. They didn't listen to him. Instead, they keep choking him.
Absolutely. Definitely. So, the breakdown of the poem, first of all, like I said, the name of the poem was called Necessary Evil. And I have an actual visual presentation to break down what's inside that poem. I can't break it down line for line, obviously, because there's so much content in it. And this is going to be a brief overview of the content, because, and I'm going to highly encourage folks to take notes and look up some of this stuff yourself, because I can't really go in great depth due to the fact that we don't have that much time. But again, I'm talking about a history of privilege in America and its consequence. And consequences doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. You know, it's all on what you put into it is what you're going to get out. But unfortunately, you know, there's negative consequences of the history of America. We're going to go into that. So before I actually go into the presentation, I have this thing called gracious space. And gracious space essentially means that respect others' opinions. You can disagree without being disagreeable, right? And everybody is going to allow others to have their voice. And if you're not connecting with the content that somebody is talking, then that's cool. Everybody have their own mind, everybody have their own points of views, but we can all respect each other in that same light, in that same breath. So there's gonna be some things in here that's gonna be very controversial. There's gonna be some images in here that people may take as disturbing, but it's real. This is the history of America, and we need to actually unpack this in order for us to move forward and be honest. Be truthful with it. You know, we were taught in grade school that Christopher Columbus discovered America. But is that really true? No, he didn't discover America. There were people already. How are you going to discover something when people is already here? Doesn't make any sense, right? So check it out. One question was about capitalism and axiology, right? So this is a chart that was created by E.J. Nichols back in 1981, and it breaks down axiology by ethnicity. And the one we're going to concentrate on now is European and Euro-American axiology, which is member to object. The highest value lies in the object or acquisition of the object. So capitalism is a prime example of that mentality, because when you look at dollar bills, first of all, you can't do anything in the United States without money, right or wrong. This is what I mean by that. In order for you to receive a service, you have to trade it with a dollar bill, right? In order for you to go to the store, you gotta buy it with groceries, right? And you need money in order to buy those groceries. You need money in order to buy the clothes that's on everybody's back right here. In order for you to get a car, you need money, right? And that's what even this school right now that you're going to school in, it is ran by money. Money is, without money, there would be no classrooms. That's just how American society works, right? So in terms of the dollar bill, it's a prime example of member to object, because first of all, examine that piece of paper itself. It has a slave master face on it. Every last one of them, even coins, got slave master faces on them. And guess what? They're all white men, which means there's also a patriarchal element to it as well, and sexist, because there's no women on those dollar bills. It's all men. So that's a problem. And again, all those people are dead, which means that their legacy are living through pieces of paper, and you can't do nothing. You can't go anywhere without that dollar bill or dollar bills, so on and so forth. So again, it's connected to that member to object mentality. Now, without going into the other ones, because for the sake of time, I'm gonna give you another example of member to object. And it's the classification systems of race. So this guy, Carl Vaughan, in 1735, he developed what we consider, so you hear black people, brown people, white people, red people. Y'all heard that term before, right? He created it. And it was based on pseudoscience. So these were the original terms for it. For those that were considered Indians or Native American, they were called Homo Americanus. And look at the definitions of it. Reddish, choleric, erect, tenacious, contented, free, ruled by custom. Homo Europaeus, white, ruddy, muscular, stern, haughty, stingy, ruled by opinion. Homo Asiaticus, yellow, melancholic, inflexible, light, inventive, ruled by rights. And Homo Aphir, black, phlegmatic, indulgent, cunning, slow, negligent, ruled by caprice. And caprice basically means that you're impulsive, like you have no uncontrol, you can't control your behavior. So when you look at this classification system, you can clearly see that the person that developed it was favoring Homo Europaeus out of anything else. And of course, he's connected to European, he's Swedish. So this is an example of member to object. We're the dominant, and anybody outside of us is an object, their property. And that's where you see the manifestation of many things that occurred in our country to this day. So an example of that, to concentrate on the Homo Americanus, was the Trail of Tears. Who ever heard of the Trail of Tears? Okay. So Andrew Jackson was the president of the time of the Trail of Tears. And during this time frame, there were some laws that was being established to push natives out of the land that they inhabited naturally. This was their land. They created laws on the books to push them out and move them. Anybody that was east of the Mississippi River, they were pushed out to move west into land that eventually was taken again, like Oklahoma and so on and so forth. And left them essentially with disease. Like over 5,000 Cherokee themselves died in this Trail of Tears due to whooping cough and other diseases or whatever. And they were forced out by gunpoint. You know, so again, that's that member to object mentality. I own this, you don't own this, and we will own you in the effect of that, which is also slavery, right? Another one, this is the first immigration law on the books when it came to excluding people. Now, you remember, y'all know about what's happening now with Mexico, right? And how they're trying to say you're not allowed in the country, so on and so forth. That's not new. This happened with the Chinese. And if you look at this propaganda picture, look really close at it. This was the type of images they were producing during that time to show that Chinese were savages, or they were these type of people that was salivating over white women. And so you had opium dens, so to speak, in San Francisco. And this is where the first drug laws came out too, because of these opium dens. They were saying that the Chinese were targeting white women, getting them high, and having part self having sex with the white husband's women. So they created these laws for the opium dens, and eventually created this thing called the Chinese Exclusion Act. Look how exclusive that is, right? Chinese Exclusion Act. Now, mind you, it was okay for them to build the railroads because they was building railroads at the time too, during that in San Francisco. However, when it came to certain things, they had to get pushed out. So we're going to concentrate on the 14th Amendment because of the certain terminologies that I introduced you to, de facto and de jure. So the 14th Amendment is supposed to protect anybody everybody's supposed to have equal rights under protection of the law of the 14th Amendment. That includes property, buying, anything that you could think of that we all should be able to have equal share or equal opportunity to get. In certain parts of the 14th Amendment said, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. So this was supposed to eliminate racial discrimination of any kind. But it didn't. As we can see, we're still with the same issues in 2019. And it's because of de jure segregation. So a lot of folks think it was de facto segregation. This is some new terms you guys could write down and really start paying attention to. So de facto segregation is done by fact, so to speak. So if you have a lot of black families living in communities, or in predominantly areas where it's black, by fact, you're gonna have a lot of black children in those schools there because so many people are populated in that area. So that's just by fact. However, how did so many black people get into that space to begin with? That was done through de jure segregation. And de jure segregation is basically ran by the government. The government say, we're going to zone certain areas where only black people can live at and where only white people can live at. And that's essentially what happened throughout history. And you look in your communities right now, I guarantee you're gonna see predominantly black people living in those communities, and you're gonna see predominantly white people living in certain communities. That is done on purpose. It's not just because black people wanna live there. They were forced there by governments and practices of the policies that the government was implementing, right? So these are the definitions, but I really encourage you guys to look this up because this is real, and it's still happening right now. These are examples of the practices, right? So exclusionary zoning or racial zoning and redlining. Exclusionary zoning is the use of zoning ordinances to exclude certain types of land uses from a given community. It was introduced in the early 1900s, typically to prevent racial and ethnic minorities from moving into middle and upper class neighborhoods. So when we think about the wealth gap, and I had a question up there, wealth gap, is it de jure or is it de facto, right? Do anybody know what the wealth gap is and how big the margin is? Go ahead. That's income. Wealth is like the amount that you have, period. You know what I mean? Despite what you make. So the income gap is another issue too. So the income gap, just to give y'all some jewels on that, the average household for a white family is about $65,000 a year. The average income household for a black family is less than $29,000 a year. Y'all hear what I'm saying? That's done on purpose. Now the wealth gap is even worse. The wealth gap is 700%, there's a 700% gap between black and white people. So to give you the numbers, the average wealth for a white family is like $250,000. That's the average wealth. The average wealth for a black family is like around $8. Talking about wealth. That's the difference. These are the practices that created that help implement that. So exclusionary zoning or racial zoning, an example of that would be certain communities being turned into slums. And how that was done? By zoning practices. So there's zone areas that black people live in and allow liquor stores to be built there, taverns, polluting industries, anything you could think of that will create or implement something that will bring down the property value and also sardine black people on top of each other with these things called projects or apartment buildings, where people are stacked on top of each other, living on top of each other, or in close proximity. If you look at the housing in black communities, look how small the spaces between the houses. Some houses don't even have backyards and driveways. So really think about what I'm talking about. This is because of zoning. They zone the places for it to be like that. Now you go in the suburbs, look how much space is in between the houses. Look how much yard space they have. Look how big the driveways are. Right? And on top of that, you going into the suburbs, what's zoned in black communities is against the law to zone in the white communities, like liquor stores. You see how many liquor stores you see inside our communities? You go into the suburbs, you don't see that many liquor stores like that. Or the bars and nightclubs, that's all over the place. Prostitution was also once legal in black communities too, by the way, just to let you know. And redlining, it feeds this. because redlining is a discriminatory practice where they are allowing certain people bank loans to buy houses while excluding others. And reverse redlining is when you are allowed a loan from the bank, but it's with a high, steep interest rate that they know you can't pay back. So you're going to end up foreclosing on a house and end up losing it and losing everything with it. So this is an example of that. I also want to point out the deeds. There are certain deeds, and by the way, I'm going to read this to you guys because this is part of the housing deeds. That was in Minneapolis, right? Listen to this. I want y'all to hear this because they were excluding certain people out of certain places. This says, lot shall there be nearer than 30 feet to the front line, street line, or sawed premises hereby conveyed. The said party or the second party hereby further agrees that when he builds on said premises, he will build a house to cost no less than $1,500. In the event that the above conditions of any of them are broken by the guarantee herein and his or hers assigns, then in this case, conveying shall be void. This is the part I really want you to really pay attention to right here. Oops, I ain't know this thing moved like that. It is further mutually covenanted that the premises hereby conveyed shall not at any time or be conveyed, mortgaged, or leased to any person or persons of Chinese, Japanese, Moorish, Turkish, Negro, Mongolian, or African blood or descent. Said restrictions and covenants shall run with the land, and any breach or any other thereof shall work a forfeiture of title, which may be enforced by re-entry. This is what was written on deeds of houses. This was also part of the process of where you got so many white people living in certain areas and so many black people living in certain areas. And also why this wealth gap is built into the system. As a matter of fact, black folks were not even allowed mortgages at all. They were allowed contracts. And if they did not pay a certain amount that month, whatever they paid, they could have been in a house for 3 years. If they missed one payment, they would lose the house, period. This was happening in mass. This was another tactic, blockbusting. Now, back in the days, there was a movie rental service called Blockbusters, right? People can go there to get movies or whatever. And people would just relate, you know, movies to blockbusters or but blockbusting was an actual practice that was occurring during the time frame when they were trying to move whites out of certain properties so blacks could move into those same houses, and then they could sell it to them at a higher value than what the house is worth, but making the white folks sell it at a lesser value because of white flight or white panic, so to speak, right? So the practice of persuading owners to sell property cheaply because of the fear of people of another race or class moving into the neighborhood and thus profiting by reselling at a higher price. This is what was happening in mass all over the country. White folks, and let me give you some examples of what they were doing with this blockbusting tactics. They would hire a black woman to push her carriage, her baby carriage, in white neighborhoods to put the effect that she was living in that community, like, oh, there's a black person living in this community, right? Or they would hire a black man to blast his music and drive through a white community just to give off the impression that somebody's black living there. They would pay a black man to go with a realtor and knock on doors and act like they're, you know, they're interested in buying a home. Slick tactics, and they worked because white folks were just running out of these homes, selling them for far less the value than what they were worth. Then they will sell that same property to somebody black for an exorbitant price, exorbitant amount that they know that they're going to be able to they're not going to be able to pay. So these are examples of the tactics that they were using. And as a result, you had a lot of people protecting this property, these communities, so to speak. And you had signs like that popping up all over the country. We want white tenants in our white community. Restrictive covenants, people coming together, white folks coming together saying we're not gonna allow anybody black here, and if somebody black move in, let's say somebody black did move in, they will open up clubhouses next to the black homes, blast music to the wee hours of the morning, throw bricks in their houses, have all kind of crazy stuff happening to try to push the black people out. And the police, guess what? They were complicit with it because all they did was watch. Sometimes police were called, they would not come for like a month. Then when they do come, they just sit there and watch, just chilling. Or they just might join in on a conversation with somebody there that's terrorizing the people in the house. Nothing happening, no protection at all. Police were very complicit with the behavior of the KKK and so on and so forth. Because lynching was happening, and also, you know, this was happening too, the police dogs. When black folks got tired of it, when they decided to be like, yo, we're not taking this anymore. So the police like, oh, okay, oh, you're not gonna take it anymore? We're gonna put you in your place. We're gonna get our dogs, we're gonna get our water hoses. But, does that sound familiar? Did that happen recently? Right? It happened recently, right? Remember Ferguson and in Baltimore, when somebody black get killed by the police, and then when blacks protest, even peacefully, here comes the tanks, here comes this tear gas, so on and so forth. And here comes new weaponry too. We're gonna start testing out these weapons that we've been working on. So in Ferguson, they were using this, I forgot what it's called, but it's a sonic, some type of sonic weapon where it sent out these high frequencies of sound to, you know, to interrupt or work on a person's psyche. And that's what they were doing in Ferguson. Also in Charlottesville, though. Notice in Charlottesville, these white folks walking with tiki torches, violence, driving cars through crowds, all kind of stuff. And guess what happened? Nothing. No tanks, no rubber bullets. As a matter of fact, the state troopers said that they couldn't intervene because the white folks had rifles themselves. And so they said there's nothing they could do about it. They just sat back and just watched. Ain't do nothing. But they had the means to do it. They didn't intervene at all. They just allowed this stuff to happen. Right? So you see the difference of approaching folks, even when blacks are peacefully protesting. You see this what happened with Colin Kaepernick now. All he's doing is kneeling. But he's banned from the NFL just for kneeling. So what's the difference between this? Who know what happened in Philadelphia? No, this happened last year. That happened in Philadelphia last year. Yes, absolutely. Who remember the images on what occurred in how the media was covering this thing that happened in Philadelphia? The imagery. All the the cars being burnt down. People walking in the street just tearing things up just because Philadelphia won the Super Bowl. Did y'all see the police participating in that? High-fiving and all of that? Right, wrong? They rioting. They burning down property. However, in Ferguson, when Mike Brown get murdered in cold blood, here comes the tanks and rubber bullets. You see, what's the difference? It's hypocritical, isn't it? So we're going to switch gears and we're going to talk about the war on drugs, right? And the war on drugs has its origins. I talked about a little bit on the Chinese Exclusion Act and so on and so forth, but I'm going to take it a little further in the history and talk about a certain president that declared the war on drugs. Before Reagan, before Bush, before the Clintons, it was Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon declared drugs public enemy #1. During the time when heroin made its way in black ghettos through samples. So in the 60s, during the 1960s, they had people in black communities handing out free samples of heroin, just free, like candy, getting people hooked on it, specifically in Harlem. And it was like widespread. And guess what? During the time they do that, he declares drugs enemy #1, when in actuality, drugs wasn't really the problem, especially during this time. He got released in 1990-something. This guy right here, John Ehrlichman, and he's Nixon's domestic policy advisor. And this is the quotation from him. This is a direct quote from him. The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt these communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. A direct quote from somebody that was working with Nixon. They planned it all. It was all racially motivated. So when you think about the war on drugs, think about race. Right afterwards comes these Rockefeller drug laws. Now, I want you to concentrate on that term, government-sanctioned human trafficking, first, because that was also one of the questions I put on the paper. That's my term I coined, because some folks call it mass incarceration, prison industrial complex, so on and so forth. When I think about what happens to communities of color, I think about human trafficking, because people are being snatched off the streets essentially for nothing. Even like right now, they're legalizing marijuana. But don't you know how many black people were locked up for weed? And now they're about to make billions of dollars off the same substance legally with no restorative justice component in those policies. So, rewind to 1973, they created these 1973 drug laws by Rockefeller and aimed to deter drug criminals by incarcerating nonviolent drug offenders with harsh sentences. 886 persons incarcerated for drug offenses in 1980. Of these individuals, 32% were Caucasian, 38% were African American, and 29% were Latino. Now check this out. This is how it flipped. In 92, 5% of those incarcerated were Caucasian, 50% were African American, and 44% were Latino. Let's think about this now. Black people are only 13% of the nation's population. White folks over 60-something%. And they possess drugs about the same rate. In many cases, whites have more, they have possession of drugs than black people do. They're just not concentrated on by law enforcement. So you have blacks being constantly racially profiled. Whites just getting away with murder, right and left. So, of course, you're going to have this type of thing because prison industrial complex or government-sanctioned human trafficking was targeting specific people. Of the 227 commitments for drug offenders in 2000, 6% were Caucasian, 53% were African American, and 40% were Latino. Today, more than 90% of persons incarcerated for drug offenses are African American or Latino. That's deliberate. This is another thing I want y'all to pay attention to as well, because when it came to the arrests, there was another bias built into it when it came to the arrest of it. So cocaine, or crack, should I say, is a cooked form of powder cocaine, right? You take it in the kitchen, you cook it up or whatever. It's the same substance, just one is powder and one is rock. Some of the first cases of crack addiction was in Los Angeles. CIA-sponsored drug trafficking, and what I mean by that is that the CIA had a big hand in getting these drugs into black communities. More specifically with the Nicaragua drug ring and things like that, and the CIA-sponsored Contras, how they were getting these drugs flown into communities of color by mass. They primarily targeted communities of color. Federal mandatory minimum laws was passed in 1986. Now this is what I want to point out to you guys. 5 grams of crack cocaine would receive a minimum sentence of 5 years, but someone would have 500 grams of powder cocaine to receive a similar sentence. So let's think about that. Black people were primarily with the crack. White people were primarily with the powder. So if you got 90% of black people being arrested for or possessing crack, and over 70% of those possessing white, of course you got bias, you got racial profile and so on and so forth. Who you think is not going to get arrested? The white people. And they can have 500 grams, 500 times more. 500 times more. Well, 100 times more, pardon yourself. 100 times more than somebody black and receive the same exact sentence. 500 grams is a half a key. Crazy. Don't got enough time to go into this clip, but this was the crime bill of '94. Bill Clinton signs the crime bill. That's with the 3 strikes, you're out. You get 3 felonies, you're done. You're gonna get a life sentence. Hillary Clinton, in this clip, she was calling black people super predators. That was the terminology that they were using for black folks, calling black people super predators. And this is the reason why she had a hard time getting elected when she ran against Trump, because of this right here. People honed in on that during her campaign. So today, we have an opioid crisis, right? Donald Trump declared it a public health emergency. In 2016, overdoses killed some 64,000 people. And this is local statistics right here, by the way. In 2016, Monroe County Medical Examiner recorded 150/fentanyl deaths and 220 in 2017. That's a 47% increase from 1 year. And it's being compared to the AIDS epidemic in the 90s and the 80s and the 90s. The face of the opioid epidemic has been mostly white, and because we have seen a massive increase in drug overdoses among young white adults, often in rural areas. The Monroe County Heroin Task Force was created as a result of this. I think that they're a year old now. From January 1st to March 31st, from January 1st to March 31st, 2018, there were 262 reported overdoses across the county. 42 of those overdoses resulted in people's deaths. In the month of March alone, 85 people overdosed on an opioid. Of those, 12 died. And the average age of a person who died of a heroin overdose is 36 years old. That's young, very young. And it's predominantly white people that it's impacting. So this is from Monroe County Sheriff Todd Baxter, and this was last year, by the way, when he said this. While we may have made significant progress and led many addicts and their families to valuable resources to begin the road to recovery, there is still much work to be done. The opioid crisis affects all of us, our families, our neighborhoods, our church communities, our friends. This epidemic is taking our loved ones from us in record numbers. Do y'all see a difference in approach with crack? Black people predominantly having crack and being addicted to crack, and how it was a criminal public safety issue during that time frame. And so they just lock them up, throw away the key. Didn't have any type of sources or resources to tackle the addiction. didn't even attempt to. Not in that capacity, and when they did, it was all criminal-based. Everything was on criminology, so to speak. But we see what's happening now. It's a different approach. They want to have a soft hand. And I'm going to talk about it. So look at the difference of the terminologies that's being thrown out now. So when heroin and crack addiction was around, people were called crackheads and junkies. Opioid addiction, people are called patients. They had methadone clinics during the time when people were, this methadone is still around, by the way, but it was predominantly methadone clinics, but now they're providing safe houses for people to use their drugs, to shoot up heroin, whatever drug it is. Safe houses. Okay, we're gonna make sure that you have a safe environment for you to do your drug because you're addicted to it. Crackheads were dispensable at that time frame. Now, white suburbanites are lobbying state officials to help save their children and treat them with dignity. They had a tough on crime policy during crack epidemic. Now, tough on crime politicians are pushing a more sympathetic approach. Anti-Drug Abuse Act, mandatory minimum sentence for crack. Now they're saying we can't arrest our way out of the problem. Y'all see the difference? Huh? Absolutely. Approach was explicitly punitive for black folks, and it impact millions of broken black families. How many people in the black community have fathers locked up in prison now because of crack? Predominantly selling crack. And the reason why they were selling is because they were trying to take care of their family, to be honest. That's the real reason why they were doing it. Because it was an economic push. But look at all the families that are broken up in black communities as a result of this. But they're trying to save the white families for the same problem. Addiction has no racial or economic boundaries. And the reason why I'm pointing this out is for one reason, right? Back in the days before we had this problem right now, white folks were saying that black people were addicted to drugs because they were poor. Seriously. This was the language that was being thrown out there. They were saying black people were more prone to addiction than any, not only because they were poor, but also because of a gene. They had a criminal gene inside them that was being bred. So it was in their genealogy to be criminals, to be drug addicts, and so on and so forth. When black folks used to go to clinics and receive pain medication, they said that they're in pain. The doctors, the physicians, they were biased towards black people. They were saying that black people have a higher threshold for pain than white people and that their skin is thicker than white people. So the bias, when white people came in, oh, they gave it out like candy. And that's why you got this opioid addiction crisis in white communities now, because the pharmaceutical industry played a big part in it, right? But as you can see, addiction has no racial or economic boundaries. Everyone is prone to addiction. And that's outside of drugs, too. You can get addicted to sex, gambling, shopping, social media, your phone. So many people can't put their phone down. Video games. So the necessary evil. Can anybody think, when you listen to the poem that I shared with you guys, can anybody think of a necessary evil that was inside that poem? Huh? Oh, he said it. He said Trump. He was on point with it, though. He was on point. Yeah, but think about it, though. I'm gonna elaborate on what you said, right? Because you're right. That's what I was getting at with the poem about Trump being a necessary evil. When Obama was in office, it was like a party. Like people were sleepwalking essentially. And there was some terminology thrown out. A lot of folks were thinking that, oh, okay, we can't possibly have racism no more because we got a black president. That don't exist. We got all these opportunities. If Obama could be president, then black people, you don't have no excuse to do da-da-da-da-da. When in actuality, there are structurally racist policies that is preventing black people from getting ahead, right? However, when Trump got into office, that whole veil been lifted. And it created movements and connections between people that you thought would never existed. So now you got folks coming together on so many different fronts because the simple fact that Trump was in office and the rhetoric that he spills out while he's in his bully pulpit. So he was definitely a necessary evil because he brought people together and it opened people's eyes and made people recognize the issues that we've been dealing with in the United States for a very long time. The stuff that's happening with Trump in office, it just didn't happen overnight. All of the stuff I was talking about in this PowerPoint been happening for centuries and decades. Centuries and decades. So I talked about the legalization of marijuana. I ain't gonna get into that too much. And who had a chance to see Black Panther? I'm pretty sure everybody did by now. Can we have a reflection on the response of Black Panther when it came out? Do y'all remember what the mania that occurred? Did anybody have any reflections on Black Panther? I want to hear what you guys have to say about it. Got a mic right here. He's doing the Wakanda sign. That's what's up. Wakanda forever. You got a hand up? Anybody put their hand up? No? Well, I can tell by the conversations that's happening right now that a lot of folks, yeah.
They're scared. You have something to say? He's talking right now. I know for a fact that all of these kids saw Black Panther.
Well, let me say this. Because I would really appreciate if you guys give me your input on Black Panther because it impacted me quite a bit. And I know it impacted the younger generation. I know it did.
The teachers can also give their input.
Yes, you can, definitely.
I guess that, and it's probably something that you've already gone over or that you have elsewhere in your lexicon, but I was looking at that connection between opioid crisis and where methadone clinics are placed right now. And they're being placed in the city or city adjacent, as opposed to way out in the county where the majority of the methadone or the heroin and fentanyl addicts are.
Yeah, so you rewind a little bit. There's something I want to, that's true. And I do also want to point out, right, that when you look at the targeting, law enforcement targeting on those who are selling the substance or who are possessing the substance, it's particularly targeted in the inner city. They're not, even though there's possession of it in the rural areas in mass. Yes, you're seeing them in the city, but there's a lot of possession of it in the rural areas. You know what I mean? Yeah.
So I'm a really big Marvel and superhero fan. And one of my favorite stories growing up was reading the original Black Panther comics from the 70s. And I think that they stuck very true to the story, the origin story of Black Panther. But I believe that people thought it was ridiculously radical in the idea of having an all-black cast. But I don't think the storyline was radical enough for the time today.
Okay. Okay. That's dope. Any other comments on Black Panther? So one thing I want to point out about what happened, and just to refresh people's memory, we have never seen a cultural phenomenon as big that occurred when Black Panther hit the scene. You've seen folks going to the movie theaters dressed in African garment everywhere. You had drumming circles. You had true African culture being implemented and highlighted as a result of that movie being released. You had so many black kids wanting to be Black Panther. You know, this is something on a whole nother level that I have never seen before. And this is called, so the art term, when you see something like Black Panther, it's called Afrofuturism, which essentially is a form of fantasy, or, you know, a reality that you can build within your own mind and then make it reality on screen or in a book or whatever the case may be. But it's basically pushing, you know, black empowerment. And that's essentially what Black Panther did. I had an actual clip of Boseman, which was he was the lead actor in Black Panther, and they just recently won an award, and he was basically breaking down the cultural phenomenon of what occurred during that time frame. And Black Panther 2's coming out too eventually, so be on the lookout for that. So for the sake of time, we got like 2 more minutes, and I wanna so what are the reflections that you heard? Because this is the end of it right now. And how can we assure that history doesn't repeat itself?
All right, so just to warn you, Mr. Ptah, that sometimes the clock is not always correct. It could be off by 30, 90 seconds even,
Okay.
just to give you a warning.
Okay. All right, well, I hope you guys can reflect on some of the things that I said. It's time to go.
There it is. Okay.
But
thank you so much, Mr.
I do
Ptah,
have-
for coming in. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, I appreciate it. I'm gonna have to do it later then.